Hello pilots! Today's video is about a true specialist. The EW-25 Medusa is a master of electronic warfare and has several features that no other airframe has. In addition to a built-in laser, radome and radar jammer pods that can disrupt radar systems, it also has a unique propulsion system. All of this comes at a price. The airframe alone costs $145 million or is available from rank 4. But before we let the Medusa take off, let's take a look at its armament. The Medusa is the only aircraft in the game equipped with a 120 kW laser. It can engage targets at an angle of 30 degrees in front of the aircraft and at a distance of up to 15 kilometers. To do so, it requires energy from the capacitor. The capacitor charges when thrust is applied. If the capacitor's energy runs low, the laser loses power. The laser also loses effectiveness with increasing distance. At a distance of 8 kilometers, it can effectively engage missiles and cruise missiles, even multiple targets in succession. It can cause minor damage to enemy airframes' engines if it hits the right spot. Ground vehicles and ships are immune to the laser radiation. The laser is therefore ideal for protecting your own aircraft and team from enemy fire. The Medusa has a rather limited selection of weapon systems. However, the weapon systems available are just as high-tech as the Medusa itself. Inside the weapon bay, it can choose between the ALMC-450 and ASHM-300 cruise missiles. These can be used to engage various ground targets at safe range. In most cases, it is sufficient to take off, lock onto the target and launch the cruise missiles. To defend itself against enemy airframes, the Medusa can choose between 3 IRM-S2 or 2 MMR-S3 missiles. For me, however, the ARED-116 is the highlight. These are missiles that search for radar guidance beams. They use the target acquisition as a reference point, but independently search for radar guidance beams during the approach and align themselves with them. With their 70 kg of TNT, they have more explosive power than an AGM-48 with 9 kg of TNT, but they cannot be used to attack a tank. However, they are extremely fast. It is best to fire them at a distance of 20 kilometers from the target so that they can reach their maximum speed. Another unique feature of the Medusa is its radome. It can carry it on its back, enabling it to be the best reconnaissance aircraft in the game. But more on that later. It should be noted that the radome adds considerable weight and drag. This reduces the Medusa's maximum speed and maneuverability. In addition to an ARED-116 missile and an ASHM-300 cruise missile, the Medusa can also carry 3 PAB-80LR glide bombs or a radar jamming pod on its inner pylons. AREDs against radar installation, ASHM-300 against large targets, glide bombs against infrared-based weapon systems and radar jamming pods against anything with active radar. Radar jamming pods work at a distance of 50 kilometers and require a line of sight to the target. More on how they work later. The outer pylons cannot carry bombs, but MMR-S3s are available as an alternative. Additional radar jamming pods could also be mounted, bringing the total number to 4. This would enable the Medusa to jam 4 targets simultaneously. However, since the capacitor's storage capacity remains the same, it will drain very quickly when using 4 pods, which is something to consider. What immediately catches the eye about the Medusa is its unusual propulsion system consisting of 4 swiveling nozzles. These are attached to the sides of the fuselage, allowing thrust to be directed backward, downward and even slightly forward. The Medusa therefore only requires short runways for takeoff and landing, and if only lightly loaded, can even take off and land vertically. This makes it very attractive for use from aircraft carriers and generally versatile when it comes to landing sites. It can take off from a Hyperion and Annex class aircraft carrier as well as from a medium hangar. During the flight you can choose to let the flight assistant take care of the thrust nozzle alignment or do it yourself. The flight assistant aligns the nozzle at a speed of 100 km to 45 degrees, which helps to get into the air quickly. After the landing gear has been retracted, it will try to align the nozzles to 0 degree if possible. All nozzles can be moved separately, which the assistant also uses to keep the Medusa stable in the air. If the thrust is reduced to below 50%, the thrust nozzles are aligned at 120 degree so that the thrust is partially directed forward. This allows the Medusa to lose speed during flight, as it has no air brakes. However, with a flight assistant, it is only possible to use slightly less than 50% of the thrust at the 120 degree position. If you deactivate the flight assist, you can adjust the position of the thrusters at full thrust as desired, which leads to greater deceleration. In addition to the flight assistant, the Medusa also has an auto-hover function. This can be very helpful when landing on aircraft carriers, as it adapts to the movement of the ship. When fully loaded, the Medusa is not capable of hovering, vertical takeoff or landing. However, it can reach high speeds and quickly ascend to high altitudes. Its climb rate is nowhere near that of a Revoker or Ifrit, but at an angle of 20 degrees the Medusa can steadily gain altitude and thus gain an overview of the situation. It is not designed for supersonic flight and is not agile enough in close combat to take on other airframes. However, it is fuel efficient and can also be used for low-level flight if it is necessary to use the terrain as cover. The Medusa has an internal active radar system with a range of 50 km. This is comparable to the radar system of other airframes such as the Ifrit. It can detect enemy air targets in a cone in front of the aircraft. However, if the Medusa is equipped with a radome, this changes dramatically. Then its radar has a range of 130 km and works in all directions. The radome is also reliable in detecting targets close to the ground, so even cruise missiles cannot escape it, and Vortex pilots are wary of its reconnaissance capabilities. This makes the Medusa an enormously powerful radar platform for the entire team, while at the same time representing a very high value target for the enemy. Radar jamming pods can impair the functionality of radar systems to such an extent that they become temporarily useless. A bolt strike can no longer detect targets, ships loses the ability to fire their radar-guided missiles, and HLT radar trucks can no longer provide nearby Stratolance launchers with the necessary data. But it doesn't stop there. Airframes can also be jammed, causing them to display incorrect informations in the HUD, unit icons to jump around on their map, and preventing them from locking onto targets for their radar-guided missiles. Last but not least, incoming radar-guided missiles can also be detected as targets and jammed with the radar jamming pods. Fox 1 missiles are disrupted by disrupting the units that fired them, as they receive their information from outside sources. Fox 3 missiles take over the radar lock-on independently after a while, which is why it is necessary to disrupt the missile directly. Radar jamming pods are extremely powerful tools that can support or even enable an attack and can be just as valuable for defense. The Medusa excels at reconnaissance of enemy units and positions. With its radome, it can detect targets at very long ranges, which means that it rarely has to stray far from its home base or fleet. It can be used not only for reconnaissance but also to weaken or destroy enemy forces. With the ARID 116, it can disable radar systems. This deprives the enemy of the ability to respond to incoming threats. or entire weapon systems become useless, as in the case of the Stratolance launcher. Ships can lose their radar and thus the ability to ward off incoming threats. Multiple hits from air raid missiles can also sink ships, and if that's not enough, there are cruise missiles that the Medusa can use against targets. In most cases, the weapons are fired during an attack and then switch directly to jammers to disable the enemy's radar system. This prevents them from responding to the incoming threat. Since the Medusa is clearly visible in the sky like a bright star and plays an important role in the game, it is a coveted target for the enemy. As a Medusa pilot, you can therefore expect to have to dodge many incoming missiles. Fortunately, there are a few options available. IR missiles can be countered with flares. If the missile is approaching from behind, it is worth pointing the thrusters forward. This reduces the Medusa's heat signature from the perspective of the incoming missile. Then, a few flares are enough to get rid of the missile. For radar-guided missiles, you can either evade them using the notch vector combined with ECM jammers, or you can lock onto them as targets and disrupt them with radar jamming pods. All incoming missiles can also be countered with a laser. However, this requires you to align yourself with the targets. But all these gadgets come at a price, the energy charge of the capacitor. Although it charges constantly, the Medusa has several consumers. First, there's the active radar, which consumes very little energy but reduces the charging rate of the capacitor. The laser, radar jamming pods and internal ECM jammers, on the other hand, are major consumers. So it's always important to manage your energy budget and maybe fly another curve to recharge the capacitor. The Medusa is expensive and can usually only be financed later in the game. But a team without a Medusa misses out on a huge amount of information about the enemy and the opportunity to drastically reduce its reconnaissance capabilities. The Medusa is also excellent at supporting your team's attacks by reconnoitering and jamming radar systems. This allows bombers to take action even if there are still bolt strikes or ships on the flight path. When I fly the Medusa, I usually stay close to allied forces and operate from the background. This gives me plenty of time to react to enemy movements or actions. I really like the game loop with the EW-25, where I lock onto one or more targets and then engage them. While the missiles are in flight, I disrupt the targets and evade incoming threats. And along the way, I provide the team with valuable reconnaissance data. The Medusa is something like a paladin, a protective shield with a powerful hammer. It is not designed for dogfights and is not intended to bring widespread destruction to the enemy. It is like a scalpel that can very precisely weaken or even destroy extremely sensitive enemy forces. Since it can operate at long range, it has a high chance of survival, which can lead to many successful sorties. Once you have the money or rank for a Medusa, with a little practice it is well able to recoup the investment. I think I've given a solid overview of the Medusa and hope to have inspired some pilots to support their own team with it. Medusa pilots are always welcome. There's only one thing left to say: fly safe.